When it comes to tabletop role-playing games, conflict is king. Conflict is what drives your stories. It's what gives your characters motivation and purpose. It presents opposition to your players' goals. Conflict is what makes for a good story. Now, you might be wondering, well, how do we go about making interesting conflicts for the players to get involved in? Well, conflicts derive from characters. So your players are going to have their own goals, but you as the game master need to make strong NPCs that also have their own goals and possibly their own conflicts that are going on around the players in the game world. These are things that the players can start to get involved in. And if they pull the wrong lever, the powder keg explodes, and you have sort of these dynamic scenarios that start to cascade and happen around the players. And that's where the story gets interesting. That's where the story gets exciting. And that's what really helps make those memorable game sessions and campaigns that you run at the table with your players. Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall, and today we are going to go ahead and make some good NPCs with some strong motivations and also create a conflict web between them. And you can use this framework to set up some interesting conflicts for your players to really have this kind of powder keg campaign where once they get involved, things will start to cascade and happen around them and make for some interesting and memorable stories at the table. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the tools we'll be using to make these conflicts and these good NPCs. Okay, we're back at the computer and we have our first resource that we're going to use pulled up. This is Kevin Crawford's Worlds Without Number. If you've watched this channel before, I use it a lot. It is a fantastic game master's toolkit to create your worlds, create your characters, create your conflicts, adventure sites, all that stuff. Today we're going to be using it to create the context of our NPCs, give them a little bit of background idea on who they are, and then also generate the high-level conflicts between the characters so we can kind of set up this triangle of NPCs that have these different conflicts between them. And then we will be using the second tool here called the Universal NPC Emulator, or UNE for short. This is going to give us a little bit more depth on who those characters are and what their motivations are so we can figure out how those relate to the conflicts between the characters. And it'll also give us some idea on their feelings or their moods towards the other NPCs that are involved in this conflict triangle, and that will help kind of set the setting for this potential powder keg. What's really great about this is you can scale this up or down if you want this, conflict, this powder keg to be your whole campaign. You could do that. If you want it to maybe be just 1 or 2 or 3 sessions worth of play, you could do that. You can scale this to the appropriate level to make it fit within your game. So let's go ahead and get some context for our NPCs. Okay, so I've gone and jumped to the court section of Worlds Without Number. In here, there are tables for lots of different factions. He calls them courts, but you can create all sorts of different characters or setups for your different factions. There's aristocratic courts, there's business courts, criminal courts, familial clan courts, and religious courts. And you can sort of roll on them to get different figures that you might want to highlight in your game and then create some other details around them. So what we're going to do is, for this exercise, we're going to be making 3 NPCs. We're going to create kind of this conflict triangle. And I'm going to use the criminal courts section for this. And I'm thinking maybe it's like an internal conflict between different members of a thieves guild or criminal gang, something like that. And these 3 different figures, even though they're a part of the same gang, maybe there's some sort of civil war type thing going on between them. And we'll roll up who they are, figure out what their power is in the court, and then also we'll roll on the internal conflicts to see what conflicts are kind of breaking apart this criminal gang. So I think for this, we're going to roll 3 figures, as I said, to create this triangle. I think we'll roll 2 major figures and 1 minor figure. And then we'll roll for their source of power in the court. That will give us some sense of who these characters are. And then we will also roll 3 conflicts. So there will be one conflict connecting between each NPC. So 3 sides of the triangle, and we'll roll on Une to get a little bit more context, and then we'll kind of place it all together. Let's go ahead and do some rolling here. So I'm going to roll 2d12, one for the figure type, and then one for their source of power. We'll do our major figures first. So our first major figure is going to be a grizzled leader. I got a 1, and their source of power, I rolled a 7. So that's going to be, they have special relations with the local ruler. Next, we have a 10. So this is going to be an outcast sorcerer, and their source of power is 11. They're diabolically cunning and persuasive. Okay, so we have an outcast sorcerer and a grizzled leader. And then lastly, our minor figure is going to be an 8, a would-be client, and then their source of power is 4. They have blackmail about the court's leadership. Let's go ahead and roll our conflicts now. So our first conflict is going to be a 12. A faction wants to enter a different sphere of crime. Okay. Our next conflict is an 11. A recent catastrophe depleted the court's wealth. Our last one is a 4, and that is the leadership is being roiled by a challenge. Let me write those down on our notes sheet, and we'll come and take a look at it. We're over on my Notion page just to draft this up. So I've got a little table here with our 3 figures. We've got their source of power. I've listed out the internal conflicts. I haven't assigned the conflicts between the 3 characters yet. I kind of want to roll up a little bit more details about their motivations and how they feel, and that will give us a sense of who they are and maybe which conflicts fit between them. I have some ideas already, but I want to hold off until we get a little bit more context there. Let's go ahead and jump over to Une to roll up some details for these characters. Okay, we are over at the Universal NPC Emulator. This has a couple tables we can roll on. It's quite simple. There's a couple pages of description here, but essentially we're going to roll an NPC modifier for each of our 3 characters, and then a noun to get a kind of a combination. So it could be something like a conservative craftsman or something like that. We know these guys are all kind of criminals, so it'll be interesting to see how exactly they fit in. Maybe some of them are front men or whatever, but we'll roll those up, see what we get. From there, you can determine the NPC power level relative to the party. I'm not going to really do that because we don't have a party in mind, but you could roll that if you wanted. And then from there, we need to roll on the motivation tables. So there's a verb table and a noun. So you roll on these 3 times for each characters. And for the nouns, you re-roll any that fall in the same column. We'll go ahead and roll those up, and then I will just come back so you don't have to watch me roll a bunch of dice there, and we'll discuss what we have on that. Okay, I'm back. I've rolled up the different items for these different NPCs. The source of power, we already rolled from Worlds Without Number, but the rest is new. So the NPC I got for the grizzled leader is an unreasonable judge. And then they have the following motivations: oppress expertise, record friends, and implement glut. For the outcast sorcerer, they are revolting adept. Makes pretty thematic sense there. Source of power again is from Worlds Without Number, and then the motivations I rolled are refine medicines, abuse patience, and persecute servitude. And our third NPC, this would-be client, is an obnoxious priest, and then the motivations are report contraband, record composure, and rob disbelief. Okay, I'm starting to get some ideas here on how these tie to the 3 conflicts we rolled up. So the last thing we need to do in using Une is roll for their moods relative to the different NPC. The relationship we can either set to probably distrustful or hostile because they are kind of conflicting with one another. I think I'll do hostile. That just sounds a little more interesting to me. And I'll roll those up and I'll get their different relationships between one another, and I will report those out. And then we'll go ahead and try to piece these different conflicts, how the different characters are involved, and what might be happening in these situations for these different NPCs. All right, I've rolled up their different moods and I've added them to our tables. So our leader's mood with our outcast sorcerer is cautious, and their mood towards the would-be client, the obnoxious priest, is helpful. And for NPC 2, the sorcerer's relationship with their leader is sociable, and their mood towards the obnoxious priest, the would-be client, is neutral. And then our would-be client is cautious with both our grizzled leader and our outcast sorcerer. I'm starting to get a sense on how these kind of tie together. I'm going to refine a few more thoughts, and then we'll go ahead and discuss just a general framework on what I'm seeing. Okay, I've thought through our internal conflicts, and I think I have a good structure for us, so let's go ahead and walk through it. I made a little graphic here to kind of show our conflict triangle, because we have 3 NPCs and we have 3 conflicts. We can kind of map them out. Looking at it and looking at the motivation, the one that was most obvious to me was the leadership is roiled by challenge, and that would be between the 2 faction members, right? This is a would-be client, so they're kind of external. So I think that this sorcerer is challenging the authority of the current leader. So that one was pretty obvious. Now, because we've rolled 3 motivations, the would-be client kind of has like a minor role to play in this conflict. There's kind of the gray lines that's sort of signifying that they're the minor player between these 3 conflicts. Going into the details here, starting with the leadership being roiled by challenge. So I figured that the motivation here for the grizzled leader is maybe they are oppressing the sorcerer. They're not recognizing their talents, their skills. They, realize that they are there, but they don't really feel like they're a major threat to their power. And the sorcerer is kind of tired of being abused, being used by the leader without recognizing their talents. Maybe they're jealous of the position of the leader, and they are going to make this power play. They want to make this challenge here. For the client, the motivation here makes sense that maybe they're like recording what's happening, what's going on in the guild. Remember, the client's source of power in this case was they have blackmail in the court's leadership. So to me, it made sense that maybe they're recording, secretly documenting what's happening, so they have this different information on these 2 major players in this faction. So whoever shakes out as the leader, they have blackmail on them. For our second conflict, I think it's between the sorcerer and the would-be client, this obnoxious priest. The guild wants to get into a new sphere of crime, but their would-be client opposes this new take, this new exploration that they want to do. And the leader is kind of overseeing what's happening, but minor player in the struggle between the would-be client and the outcast sorcerer. For me, the one that really stuck out here was the outcast motivation of refined medicine. So maybe they're getting into some sort of drug trade or some sort of alchemical reagents that are illicit or contraband, maybe poisons, the sorcerer is interested in. For whatever reason, the priest is opposed to that, and they are interested in reporting that contraband. So maybe there's something in it for them in terms of that blackmail. They can use that against other people. They want to stop whatever the sorcerer is trying to do in this case. And for the grizzled leader, I had record friends here. So kind of similar to record composure. Maybe he's just documenting what's happening between these 2 to see if there's some sort of leverage that he can gain in these other conflicts that's happening around him, but otherwise, is content to kind of see what struggle shakes out between the other 2 players in this conflict triangle. So then we have our third conflict, the recent catastrophe that depleted the court's wealth. The major players in this one are our current grizzled leader and the would-be client or the priest. The one that made sense here to me was the grizzled leader's motivation of implement gluttony. Here I'm thinking that maybe they overindulged in something and they got caught by this priest. Don't know what it is. Maybe they spent a ton of money on extravagant parties, or maybe they abuse the local government's treasury coffers. Remember, the grizzled leader has special relations with the local ruler, so maybe it's something to do with that. They screwed up. They did something that is overextended their purpose in sort of this gluttonous fashion. The priest caught wind of that. Their power against the leadership or the guild is that they have blackmail. So they're blackmailing the guild, they're extorting them, and as a result, maybe they've taken a massive sum of the guild's money. The sorcerer's motivation of persecute servitude here, I think, fits because they are a part of the guild and they've really lost out, right? They've lost all these funds because of the leader's screw up. And the guild members might start to be really upset by this. And the sorcerer can use that in their own conflict. The leadership is being roiled by challenge, right? They realize that this is maybe the last straw. It's time to make a change in the leadership of the guild. And the sorcerer's power was they are diabolically cunning and persuasive. So maybe they're starting to appeal to the rest of the servitude, the members of the guild, that they've been persecuted. They've lost a lot of their resources because of the leader's screw up. That's kind of what I'm seeing there. And then for the client's motivation, the rob disbelief, well, in this case, I'm just taking robbery in sort of the literal sense of blackmail. Disbelief, not sure exactly how that would fit into it. I could give it a little bit more thought. But when you're using these spark tables, just take what makes sense to you and discard the rest. That's a good rule of thumb. Don't overthink things. Whatever makes sense, use that. Go with it, refine it. That is the 3 conflicts we have going on within this organization and these 3 NPCs that we rolled up. So that's really it. Those are kind of the quick ideas I came up with for these 3 characters. Even though we rolled it up as a criminal court, it seems like maybe some of them have ties to other organizations. We have the priests, so maybe they're tied to the church. This guy was rolled up as a judge, so maybe they are actually a part of the nobility or the government, and that's how they have kind of those special connections and powers. And you can kind of see these different things form from it. And just really go with it. You can build out the different ideas and, think what would be interesting to the players, what would be opportunities for the players. So there's this massive wealth that's been taken. Maybe the leader wants to get it back from this priest and they're willing to give the players a cut of the money, or this contraband, these drugs are powerful or useful to the players if they can get their hands on them. And then also on like the leadership side, maybe there's some sort of special favor or access that the players can get if they side with one or another in the power of the faction. Just different ways that can tie into the players and make it interesting for them, and just go from there. The other thing I would say is you can decide on if you want to have these different conflicts happening all at once, pretty close together, or sequential order where this one happens first, and then if the players do nothing after a certain time, this one happens. Things like that to kind of add depth to characters, or they can be more tightly packed together. In this case, I think for these are relatively close to one another. Like maybe the blackmailing has kind of happened or is happening soon, and then this is ongoing as well. And then there's a soon going to be an opportunity for maybe a leadership coup. I kind of designed it with them all sort of happening relatively in the same time frame, but I think it would make more sense to present them in more of a sequential fashion. You could do that too. So hopefully that is helpful. Hopefully that's interesting. That's how you can create some different conflict webs in your games and get some interesting scenarios that are happening, and then get the players involved and see what happens at the table. Leave a comment. Let me know if you found this type of powder keg conflict interesting. Hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more content like this in the future. Consider checking out Enchanted Nimbus, my monthly newsletter. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.